Are you looking for an awesome gaming PC? Do you like things that are brand new? If so, look no further. I swear, some of these computer resellers would make great used car salespeople. I've titled this video what I have because I feel as though many people on Craigslist, Let Go, OfferUp, wherever, are targeting consumers as of late, but more specifically, targeting consumers' stimulus checks. Basically, free money our government decided to print to stimulate growth and help out families pulling in under $150K a year. And economic repercussions and viability aside, I think this would be an awful way to spend your hard-earned $1,200. It's actually not hard-earned if you just got it for free for doing nothing. But anyway, stay with me. If you're sick of seeing that same Activate Windows watermark over and over, snag an OEM license from SCD Key. You'll have a fully activated OS in seconds, and you can kiss that watermark goodbye. And be sure to use menu offer code GSL for that sweet discount. i5 9600K, 16 gigs of RAM, GTX 1660, 500 gig SSD, Wi-Fi, desktop. I mean, I give the guy props for listing vital information in the title. Maybe not as much with the Wi-Fi part, but still, you know what you're getting yourself into when you click on this ad. But the description starts off so horribly that it makes me want to click away just as fast. You shouldn't need to ask questions in a for sale listing if you are the seller. That's the job of the potential buyer to do. And another thing, quit with this brand new crap. I mean, you aren't a pre-built company. You don't offer your own warranty for these parts. You had to open these boxes physically to build the system in the first place. So by definition, the parts aren't new. We have a video talking about this specifically if you're interested. And as much, we have no way of knowing if these parts are in fact new just based off of your word. Anyone could lie. It literally takes zero effort. I mean, sure, the P300 here still has the tempered glass peel on, and sure, he's reiterated the same July 15th date a couple of times in the ad, but anyone could do these things. And these photos could be months old. Who knows, right? The best you could do maybe is show a receipt, but what I recommend sellers do instead is avoid being specific altogether and just provide a vague but, accurate enough time reference for when it was built. A few weeks ago, a few months ago, heck, a few years ago. That's about all that needs to be said. Most of the time the buyer can figure the rest of that out, and it's not really that relevant. And if you're building these systems and flipping them almost immediately in a business fashion as quote unquote new, then you should act on behalf of said business and not as an individual. It'll give you way more street cred and allow you to build up a reputation over time. Just my thoughts. Next up, let's talk specs. Intel Core i5 9600K. It's a generation old. Still going for around $200 brand new though on Amazon apparently. And so I guess I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and assume this price for overall used value. We'll list it somewhere on the side of the screen, starting with $200 right there for the CPU. 16 gigs of DDR4 at 2400 megahertz. Not that frequency is as relevant for Intel as it is Ryzen, but it'd be nice to have something a bit faster than this. These are pretty cheap modules, to put it lightly. You can literally find 16 gigs at 3000 megahertz with CAS latency 16 for just over $50. So now I think offering exactly that, $50 in the used market, is more than fair. This puts us at $250 so far. Next up, the graphics card. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and say this up front. I already know this PC is way overpriced, but the icing on the cake is this card here. A GTX 1660 is a sub $200 card on the used market all day. In fact, it barely costs more than that brand new, especially when seen in the light of the 1660 Super. But seeing it listed in a $1,200 system, apparently, is downright disappointing. We'll give another benefit of the doubt though, and we'll just assume $200 even for this card. Who cares? At this point, $450 it is. He's listed the case next, a Fantex P300. It's certainly a cheaper case in many respects, but for the price it ain't bad. I'll give him $50 for it, assuming it's in great shape. Now we're at around $500. And then we come to one of the strangest parts in the build, this Gigabyte H370 HD3 motherboard. That's right, he paired an unlocked desktop SKU, a 9600K, with a chipset that does not allow manual overclocking or any multiplier manipulation at all. At that point, he should have just purchased a Core i5 9400F, would have made much more sense, and I wouldn't have much to complain about, at least with respect to hardware combinations. But this here is just crazy. Either he has no idea what he's doing, or recycled the CPU from another system. Either way, it shouldn't be your burden to bear, and this is where buyer education is important. Do your research. Even if you're just gonna do a little bit of research, it all helps, right? Before sending an offer, especially for something that costs as much as $1,200, according at least to the seller. Anyway, brand new, the motherboard is about $100. I'll give him that, right? Just for the sake of argument. It won't change anything about my conclusions later on in case you're wondering, but that puts us at around $600 so far. Now, to make matters worse, he's paired the unlocked chip with a super low profile tiny air cooler, one that I doubt could keep the 9600K cool enough even at stock conditions, mind you. It looks similar to Silverstone NT07. I couldn't tell exactly what this was after doing a couple quick Amazon and Newegg searches. He's got a Rosewell branded box in this image, and I don't see any other Rosewell product anywhere, so it's possible it could be like the RCX Z775. Either way, it's too small, right? And you'll likely run into thermal limitations with it under load. Let's just say 20 bucks for it, whatever. That puts us at, what, 620 bucks so far. Next up, we've got an EBJ 500 watt power supply. This exact model is one I've actually recommended several times in the past for budget builders. I've never really had a problem with any of them that I can recall, and I've purchased most of them out of pocket, so it's not like I've been sampled, cherry-picked products. Yeah, they also run fairly quiet, which is pretty good for the price. I think they're only 80 plus efficient, but that's good enough in a 500 watt system in my opinion. A bit lackluster, sure, in a $1,200 build, according again to the seller, but it's good enough for this particular hardware config. Power supplies are a bit expensive across the board at the moment, so we'll round up our $620 to 700 bucks, just for good measure. Lastly, we've got a WD Blue 500 gig SSD. Kingston sells nearly identical ones though for 50 bucks. You can even find cheaper ones than this if you want to go with like some sketchier brands, but we'll factor 50 bucks into the price, along with, I guess, a $20 or so Wi-Fi card that he didn't even bother specifying in the ad. That's a little over, my math is correct here, 750 bucks all in for the hardware. And remember, we went above and beyond to make up for as much of this price difference as possible. By the way, if you're wondering, Windows 10, which I doubt he bought a retail key for since he doesn't even specify, can be installed for free and activated for 15 bucks or thereabouts with an OEM or volume key from a site like our sponsors. I recommend that all day over a $100 or $120 retail key. It's kind of ridiculous how expensive those are. And Windows is just fine with you using this thing without even activating it, so you could totally do that as well if you're okay with a watermark. There aren't any LEDs in the system. He points that out in the description, which I think that's forthcoming to an extent. 3 different budget fans are included, and he mentions that he'll include original boxes with the sale upon request. Not bad. But what I don't like is the characterization of this 500 watt power supply, where he makes it seem as though this thing's got a ton more breathing room at its disposal. I mean, sure, 500 watts is perfectly fine. It's more than enough for this system, but it's still on the lower end for wattage and could give a potential buyer false impressions about what this thing is actually capable of. So not only are there highly questionable parts choices mixed into this build, but his asking price is far too high to even entertain. And look, I get this question a lot when I post these types of videos. Well, Greg, isn't it the seller's job to list a higher price than he'd be willing to take at the end of the day? I thought that was the point of the negotiation after the fact. The answer to that is yes, 100%, but what the seller should not do is set his or her starting price so high that he ends up shying away potential customers. They may not take you seriously if you're willing to mark up your system by 50% or more in this case. It's just ridiculous. It's a turnoff. And you'll find that a lot of these sellers are so stubborn and dead set on their prices at the end of the day that a reasonable offer comes across as offensive to them. Which, at that point, the negotiation's finished. You might as well just give up, pack your bags, look at another listing. Don't even bother with this person. And before you also start saying, well, it isn't technically a terrible ad. It's roughly 750 bucks versus his asking price of 1,200. That's only around a $450 difference, nowhere near as bad as some of your videos out there. And look, yeah, you can work on the negotiation a bit. I'm sure he'd probably take $1,000 for it, $1,100 still. I just want to give you a frame of reference for what $1,200 will do for you. 8 cores, 16 threads, a faster SSD, a 600 watt power supply, and an RTX 2070 Super, all for the same price that he's asking. That's the difference. So ask yourself, would you rather have this or this? It speaks for itself. I mean, even during this weird economic downturn, you can still crush a system like this at this price point, and that's why it infuriated me when I saw it. And the fact that he's priced it specifically at $1,200, which is the bare minimum for the stimulus checks for most Americans who qualify for it, it just gives me the feeling he's targeting some unsuspecting buyer with a fresh check in his or her hand from the government. Some might say, well, if they're willing to buy something like this without investigating first, they deserve it. And I hear this a lot as well when these videos go live. Sure, I can see that side of the argument, but my logic to this, my approach to this is this. I would be much more upset at the fact that the buyer was willing to contribute to the seller's ridiculous tactics and inadvertently reaffirm a ridiculous asking price to begin with. He or she will think that if he can get away with it once, he'll get away with it again. And the cycle continues. So you aren't helping anything in the long run. You're actually making things worse by giving the seller this crazy amount of money that is in no way justified. To be clear, I have no way of knowing that that's what the seller's trying to do in this particular case, but $1,200, that ain't gonna fly. Not in my book, and it shouldn't fly in yours either. So don't buy it. And to that end, again, even if it was listed appropriately, the hardware combination hardly makes sense, even for $750. Don't make his problem yours. So again, don't buy it. Get it? If you enjoyed this video or learned something, click that like button. I would appreciate it. Consider subscribing, and I will catch you in the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for learning with me.